Nobody actually argues to find the truth. You know that, right? Watch any debate, online, on TV, at Thanksgiving dinner. And what you're seeing isn't two people searching for the right answer together. It's two people trying to win. And winning, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with being correct. Here's what this video is: a breakdown of the actual mechanics of persuasion. Not the philosophy class version, not the "here are 5 tips for better communication" version. The real psychological architecture behind why certain arguments land and others collapse, and why the smartest person in the room loses debates more often than you'd expect. But before we get to the part that actually changes how you argue, you need to understand something about your brain that the ancient Greeks figured out over 2,000 years ago, something that modern neuroscience has since confirmed, and that every politician, lawyer, and cult leader in history has been quietly exploiting ever since. Rhetoric, the formal study of persuasion, is around 2,400 years old. Aristotle didn't invent arguing. He just noticed that the people who were best at it weren't the ones with the strongest facts. They were the ones who understood their audience. He broke persuasion into 3 pillars: logos, the logical appeal; ethos, the appeal to credibility; and pathos, the emotional appeal. And what he found was that logos, pure logic, was almost always the weakest of the 3. Not because humans are stupid, because humans are human! Here's where most people go wrong. They assume that if you have the better argument, you'll win the argument. So they pile on evidence, cite studies, build airtight logical chains, and then watch in complete bewilderment as the other person just doesn't change their mind. This happens constantly. It happens to scientists arguing against flat earthers, to doctors arguing with anti-vaxxers, and, let's be honest, to you, at least once, trying to explain something obviously true to someone who clearly wasn't listening. Why does this keep happening to smart, well-prepared people? Because persuasion isn't a logic problem. It's a psychology problem, and the two operate by completely different rules. The Romans understood this better than almost anyone. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, once said that the best speech is the one that makes the audience feel like they already believe what you're telling them. Not convinced, not converted, already there. That's a fundamentally different goal than proving you're right, and it produces fundamentally different results. The myth, the one still being sold in debate clubs, courtrooms, and comment sections everywhere, is that the strongest argument wins. It doesn't. The most resonant argument wins. And resonance is not about data. So what actually makes an argument resonate? This is the part nobody explains cleanly, so pay attention. Your brain does not process information neutrally. It never has. What it does, what it's been doing since before language existed, is pattern match incoming information against what it already believes, and then accept or reject based on fit. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but that word has become so overused that people hear it and think, oh yeah, that thing where people like stuff they already agree with. That's not quite it. It's more sinister than that. Confirmation bias doesn't just make you like agreeable information better, it actively makes you worse at evaluating disagreeable information. A 2010 study out of the University of Michigan found that when people were shown factual corrections to their existing beliefs, they didn't update their beliefs. It doubled down. The researchers called it the backfire effect. Give someone proof they're wrong, and you don't move them toward truth. You push them further into the position they already held. That right there is why argument by evidence has a ceiling, a hard one. I still remember the first time I lost an argument I was completely, objectively right about. I had the data, I had the study, I had the timeline, and the other person walked away more convinced than ever that I was wrong. It cost me about 3 weeks of thinking I must have explained it badly, before I realized the explanation had nothing to do with it. Here's where it gets interesting. The most effective debaters in history didn't bludgeon people with facts. They asked questions. Socrates, the guy Plato kept writing about, built an entire method around this. The Socratic method isn't a teaching technique, it's a dismantling technique. You ask someone to explain their position. Then you ask them to explain the part of it that doesn't quite make sense. Then you ask what they'd say to someone who disagreed with that part. And you keep asking, calmly, genuinely, without attacking, until the person has walked themselves into a contradiction they built themselves. They can't reject the conclusion, because they reached it on their own. This matters to you, because the moment you make someone feel attacked, the argument is over. Their brain flips from reasoning mode into defensive mode, and in defensive mode, no one evaluates evidence. They just protect their position. It's a biological response. The same stress system that would have protected your ancestor from a lion is now protecting your cousin's opinion about cryptocurrency. Evolution is slow. Now here's the twist, and this is the thing that genuinely changed how I think about every conversation I've had since. The most dangerous argument isn't a bad one. It's a confident one. Confidence is a signal that human brains read as competence, even when it isn't. Studies on jury behavior show that witnesses who speak with hesitation are rated as less credible than witnesses who speak with certainty, regardless of which one is actually telling the truth. Lawyers know this. Salespeople know this. Politicians have known it for centuries. Framing compounds the effect. The exact same fact, presented two different ways, produces opposite emotional reactions. A surgery that has a 90% survival rate is chosen far more often than the same surgery described as having a 10% mortality rate. Same numbers, completely different gut response. Kahneman and Tversky mapped this in the 1980s and called it prospect theory. But you don't need to know the academic term to see it operating everywhere. Every headline you read is framed. Every product you buy was pitched in a specific frame. Every argument you found persuasive landed the way it did, partly because of the door it chose to walk through. So where does this leave you? Not with a checklist. Arguments don't work that way. But with a fundamentally different picture of what's actually happening when two people disagree. Imagine someone walking into their next difficult conversation, a negotiation, a debate with a coworker, an argument with someone who's wrong on the internet and absolutely needs to be corrected. The old instinct is to load up with facts, come in strong, dismantle the other position point by point, and they do it well. They win, technically. The other person goes quiet. Maybe they even concede a point or two. But nothing changes. Next week, same conversation, same positions. Because winning an argument and changing a mind are not the same thing, and most people spend their whole lives optimizing for the wrong one. The better move, the one that actually shifts people, starts before any argument begins. It starts with understanding the frame the other person is already operating in. What do they value? What outcome are they defending? What does being wrong about this particular thing cost them? Because people don't protect bad ideas randomly. They protect ideas that are load-bearing, ideas their identity, their community, or their sense of being a competent person depends on. Attack the idea, and you attack all of that. Ask questions about the idea, and you invite them to examine it themselves. The most powerful rhetorical tool ever documented isn't a technique, it's genuine curiosity. Real questions, not leading questions designed to trap, but actual, help me understand how you got there questions. Disarm the defensive system and switch the other person's brain back into reflective mode. That's where real persuasion lives. Not in the force of your argument, but in the quality of your listening. Logical fallacies, strawmanning, ad hominem, false dichotomies, slippery slopes, are everywhere once you know how to see them. And knowing them matters, but naming them in an argument almost never works. Tell someone they've committed a strawman fallacy and you've just made them feel condescended to, which means you've lost them. Understanding the fallacy well enough to redirect the conversation without labeling it, that's the actual skill. Winning an argument, in the end, might be the most overrated goal in human communication. The people who actually move the world, the negotiators, the great lawyers, the leaders who build real consensus, they're not trying to win. They're trying to understand well enough that the other person convinces themselves. That's a completely different game. And the rules of that game are stranger, harder, and far more interesting than anything happening in a YouTube comment section right now. The question that's harder to answer, and worth sitting with, is whether you actually want to be right, or whether you want to be effective. Because for most of human history, those two things have not been the same. And figuring out which one you're really after, that's where the actual work starts.